Silver Shoes. A middle-aged stallion and local silversmith sat huddled against the door leading into his cabin. Though he had locked the door, he still could not feel safe until he had the comforting knowledge of some weight pressed up against the door, somehow expecting that it would do more to keep out that which lurked just beyond the wooden barrier. Silver pressed his hooves harder against his ears, even as he curled up tighter into himself. The constant sound of light scratching against the wood on the other side. A constant reminder that something was out there. But worse, the scratching seemed a constant thing, as if whatever was out there knew that he was in there. And it seemed intent on torturing him. The scratching would continue in its same monotone of a slow sliding of something sharp against the wood, then pause a moment before starting again. Sometimes the pauses would last for almost a minute before continuing. This only grew worse with the added motion of something jiggling the doorknob and pushing and pulling lightly on the door. Then another scratch, then a jiggle, and finally a shake of the door. Those three simple sounds, over and over again, in a pattern that seemed bent on driving Silver mad with fear. He sobbed, wrapping his hooves around his head as he attempts to muffle the noise. It seemed fruitless. How had this all come to be? He sobbed, hearing the scratching again. His mind began to replay events before him, as if in its flickering of mental pictures would help him recall where things had gone wrong. Perhaps in them he might find salvation, or at least an explanation. Out of all the images that came to mind, his work as a silversmith, his family, his friends, his town, out of all of this, one image came to mind. An idol. That damn, terrible idol. It was small, about the size of a mini watermelon. It was not at all well made. A basic square base with 4 curved spikes at the top and curving till the points aimed at the flat base of the idol. The base had decorated with old runes and images of figures. When they had found it, every pony had assumed it was some sort of old relic, and news of it spread, attracting archaeologists from across Equestria. The mine and its surrounding lines soon became a dig for further artifacts. For a week, the dig turned up little, save old pottery and some stone figures. One digger said they might have found a tunnel leading to what was assumed to be a complex of some sort. Of course, no pony was able to find out, as the last day of that week, things began to change. Slowly, little by little, a fog started to appear in the town. Nothing no other ponies did seemed to make it go away. Ponies were concerned, but figured that it was just some mild fog that blew in from the Everfree. The town was right on its border after all. Ponies assumed that, in time, the fog would pass away. The fog slowly began to grow, hour by hour, until it engulfed the entire town in a thick, white, hazy screen. Ponies could see barely a hoop in front of them. That is when the screaming began. Silver had been outside with his wife when they heard the first of the screams. It sounded like a pony was being brutally murdered in the thick fog. Ponies shouted, running and fleeing in the fog, despite the difficulty of sight. All the while the screaming kept up, and the sounds of ripping flesh and blood splattering on the ground and walls of the houses. Silver and his wife did not bother to wonder what was happening. Their instincts for survival kicked in, and then they ran as fast as their hooves could carry them to their cabin on the outskirts of town. The fog seemed to be a constant companion with them. They were just a few feet from their home when Silver's wife tripped and fell. Silver turned, ready to go back and run to help his wife, but any such thoughts faded when he heard her screaming. The sounds of ripping flesh evident in the air. Fear took hold, accompanied by sadness. Silver cried even as he ran, part of his mind telling him to go back and help his wife, but a more primal part telling him to run. He kept running, bursting through the door of his cabin and slamming the door shut and locking it. And so here he was, locked in his home, curled up in a ball, weeping, crying. Outside, the sound of scratching continued. What had caused it? It had to be the idol. It was the only explanation, or that's how it seemed to Silver. Somehow, it had brought the fog, and with the fog had come what? Silver sucked in a breath and peered over to the window near the door. The outside was white and hazy with fog. He could not see anything, and yet he had to know. He didn't want to know, but he had to know what was out there. He knew something was out there, and his curiosity compelled him to look. Slowly, surely, he crawled over to the window, scratching at the door, never stopping. Slowly, he peeked outside. He didn't see a thing. Silver leapt back as a thin, stick-like appendage of a claw connected to a long, just as thin limb planted itself on the window. It was covered in pink, blood-covered skin that seemed stretched over the bones. The claw bent and had a head appearing in sight of the window. Silver began to hyperventilate now as he stared into a bloody pink-skinned face. It had long, paper-thin, slit-like eyes, no nose. Its mouth was thin, sharp teeth slipping out between where lips should be. Its ears were long and curved, almost bitten and chewed. The head had no neck, just connected to an oval-shaped body. The creature stared at him. Then it tapped on the glass before its claw reached out beyond the window's view to where the door would be. All the while, the creature kept its eyes on Silver. Silver covered his face, trying to hide himself from the creature as he heard it scratch at the door. He pushed himself back against his nightstand with his legs, knocking it down. the contents of his drawer falling out. Silver looked to the spilled items, to the creature in the window, and to the door. Celestia, it knew it was in here. It wanted to get in. With horror, Silver saw what looked like holes beginning to appear in the inside portion of the door. The tips of long, thin claws peeking and poking through as it dragged wood apart. The fog slowly beginning to seep through. Silver began to breathe heavily, his heart racing. The thin, claw-like fingers flicked at the lock, trying to undo it with what little movement the creature had. Silver looked around for any means of escape. There was none, of course. That is, until his eyes saw it. It was his gun. An old Griffin model he had purchased as a means of self-defense. It took a long time to reload, and the ball bullet was not the most accurate, but it was top of the line in the Griffin Kingdoms. Silver did not know if it would work on whatever it was trying to get. He had one shot. That was it. That was the way out. Silver began to cry and laugh at the same time as he was dead. He was going to die, just like his wife had died, just like every pony in town had died. He might as well die quickly. Then, however, which way the creature outside would end him. Slowly, Silver took the gun in his hooves. A smile crept along his face as tears rolled down his eyes. He placed the gun to his head and pulled the trigger. His body slumped, and the gun fell to the ground with a clatter. He lay there, his blood pooling on the floor. Eventually, the white, hazy fog seeped fully into the cabin, and two long, thin, claw-like hands gripped Silver's limp body and dragged it into the fog.